is Ed Taylor. I'm the Dean and Vice Provost of Undergraduate Academic Affairs at the University of Washington. The University of Washington acknowledges the Coast Salish peoples of this land, the land which touches the shared waters of all tribes and bands within the Suquamish, Tulalip, and Muckleshoot nations. We honor and acknowledge the land on which we sit. Last year, I was in a park in Seattle. I was at a rally. It was an intergeneration community of people. They had their fist in the air. They were demonstrating. They were calling for justice. They had bullhorns in one hand. Moments later, after marching, they engaged in song, prayer, they acknowledged the land, they read poetry, and they demonstrated acts of care and mutual aid. These beautiful people had bullhorns in one hand and masks and sanitizer, bread and fresh water in the other. All in one space, acts of resistance and acts of care and mutual aid, they were flourishing. This year, two centers have come together, Center for Communication, Difference, and Equity, and the Resilience Lab have launched a partnership in order to create programming that will address the stressors that our most vulnerable populations, particularly Black, Indigenous, and peoples of color, experiencing during the pandemics in our midst. The partnership is called Resistance Through Resilience. The Center for Communication, Difference, and Equity facilitates intergenerational dialogue around race and intersection and creates tools for action against intersectional racism. The Resilience Lab teaches cognitive behavioral skills to manage emotions and cope with challenging situations using mindfulness skills to strengthen self-awareness and practices that promote self-compassion. My colleagues have brought together proven intervention methodologies to address racial exhaustion by bringing critical race perspective to mindfulness and mindfulness to critical race work. Rhonda Magee is kicking off the Resistance to Resilience speaker series, and she will provide us with inspiration and renewed rigor as we nourish ourselves and stand with our communities in our everyday confrontations around oppression. I'd like to introduce my colleague, Raylina Joseph. She is a professor of communication. She is a director for the Center for Community, Difference, and Equity. She is Associate Dean for Equity and Justice in the Graduate School. She is a scholar, she is a servant leader, and she is a friend. Raylina.
Hi, everyone. Welcome back. So I just want to briefly tell you a little bit about how we came to this project. I've been directing the Center for Communication, Difference, and Equity for the past 6 years. And since the fall of 2016, when the former president came into office, we, as Ed was saying, we've been doing these programs that are called Interrupting Privilege, where we bring together people across generation, often across race and across experience, to talk about race and its intersections. And at the heart are dialogues. We just bring people together to really hear and to hold their conversations. The last 2 years actually, we had conversations for Black Seattleites about what the experience was like to be Black in this very white city. And COVID hit, as did our dual pandemic, as we like to talk about it, of this moment of racial reconciliation. And our program that was really focused on talking about Black Seattle became Quarantining While Black. And people began to realize that they needed to do more than just work in the interrupting privilege space that we have been teaching people, but they needed to address the very real racial exhaustion. And it was at that moment where we partnered with the wonderful Megan Kennedy, who you're going to meet in just a minute here, who is the director of the University of Washington's Resilience Lab. And we started to come together and think about how we could bring our programs together to not just work to combat racism, not just work to combat oppression, but think about how we could care for ourselves and our communities in the process. So now I'm going to go ahead and pass the mic over to Megan, who will continue to tell us a little bit about the evening.
Thank you, Relina, and also thank you, Ed. I want to start by taking a moment to thank the sponsors who helped make the evening with Rhonda Magee possible. Our deepest appreciation goes to just a number of people, starting with the Mind and Life Institute, UW's Diversity and Inclusion Seed Grants, the Department of Communication, and Undergraduate Academic Affairs. And we also extend our gratitude to individual donors and foundations who support our respective centers, the Resilience Lab and the Center for Communication, Difference, and Equity, and make our programming possible. And also many of you who are present tonight also made a contribution when you registered. We're grateful for your donation, and we plan to direct those funds to future Resistance Through Resilience lectures. And finally, a big shout out to the folks behind the scenes from Dancing in the Rain Media and Daryl Glover for running the show tonight. We so appreciate and respect your work. So the format for tonight is as follows. Rhonda's going to present for about 30 minutes, and then we'll transition to the Q&A portion of the evening. And we have a few planned questions, but also invite you to pose questions to the YouTube live stream chat. We would ask that you just wait to pose your questions until we start the Q&A, because this is going to ensure that our team can keep track of the questions. And now I have the honor and really, truly the joy of introducing Rhonda V. Magee. So Rhonda Magee is a professor of law at the University of San Francisco, using law and legal history as a platform for her transformative work in mindfulness, education, and social justice. With extensive experience in conflict engagement and group facilitation, her teaching and writing draws on compassionate practice, storytelling, and analysis as inspiration for a new way of thinking about our place in a rapidly changing world. With 20 years of experience as a professor of law, Rhonda Magee's background as a mindfulness teacher includes a fellowship with the Mind and Life Institute, a seat on the board of advisors of the University of Massachusetts Center for Mindfulness and the Search Inside Yourself Leadership Institute, and a position as the former board president of the Center for Contemplative Mind and Society. In addition to her book, The Inner Work of Racial Justice, Healing Ourselves and Transforming Our Communities Through Mindfulness, Magee is the author of several articles and book chapters on the intersections of mindfulness, law, and race. Rhonda, our university community has really been looking forward to having you here tonight. Thank you for joining us.
Well, it is an honor and a privilege to be in this moment of engagement with your beautiful community here. So I just want to say thank you as well to the sponsors and to the team behind both the Resilience Lab on the one hand and the Center for Communication, Difference, and Equity on the other. So really just want to appreciate all those without whom this wouldn't be possible. And I want to extend the appreciations to all those who've gathered here because we could always be otherwise and elsewhere. So I'm appreciating the fact that you've taken time out of your lives to join with us. So I do have some reflections prepared and I have some slides and all of those formal things. But before I move into those, I want to check in and invite all of us to do a bit of checking in. How are you? How are you right now? As we come together around this theme of the inner work of racial justice in a time of, challenge on so many different levels for so many of us. So before we go into prepared remarks, I'd actually really invite us to do a bit of practice together, if you're willing. And this is a very gentle practice that you can engage in whatever way feels right for you. I'm going to be doing it in a seated posture, but really, however your body would be supported in this moment. This is an invitation to simply fully and consciously arrive here, now. Feeling the points of contact between the body and the floor, So again, without not having to do anything in particular in terms of a posture, just see if you can just feel your body right here, right now, in contact with the earth. As you do so, you may find yourself wanting to feel that a little bit more intentionally, placing the feet on the floor in a flat way, allowing the body to be supported by a chair if you're seated in the chair, or just really lengthening the spine, so that if you are invited to breathe in and out, as you will be, you are already doing so, but bringing our attention, invited to bring attention to the sensations of just breathing and sitting. As we do so, see if you can just open yourself up to a little bit more deeply checking in with how you are in this moment. Maybe doing a gentle scan, starting perhaps from the feet, whether sitting flat on the floor or otherwise, but allowing your attention to gently scan through your feet, lower legs, knees, upper legs, lower torso, midsection, this belly that is so important for digesting the nutrients we take in and processing and giving us the energy for our lives. Take a moment to honor this part of the body and all these other important organs that are so quietly and perfectly, magnificently in their own way, even if we may be suffering from some illness or in some way challenged. Know that if we're here, there is more right than wrong with our bodies. So breathing in and breathing out, sensing into what is well within you. As we move up through the mid region of the torso, upper torso, feeling now the lungs and the heart region. Oh, and allowing ourselves that just this moment of reconnecting with the magnificence of the beating heart, the lungs, this beautiful interchange between oxygen and carbon dioxide, which as we breathe in and allow ourselves to breathe out, we can notice the gentle ways in which just to breathe is to be reminded that we are already supported by so much beyond the human, beyond our choices, by just this very breath of life. So breathing in and breathing out, feeling as best you can what is well within you, feeling the strength and clarification, if it is so for you, feeling just how it is that a cleansing breath, breathing in a deep breath out, allowing yourself to release perhaps a little bit more on the out breath than you typically allow yourself to do. Yeah, let it go. And breathing in and breathing out. Now just resting. And the sensations of that gentle caress. Who's caressing what? The body and the air flowing in and out. So allow yourself to rest in the sensations of this as you continue this gentle scan. Again, up through the upper torso, front and back, through the shoulders, and now down through the upper arms. And as you do so, just notice any way in which you might be holding a little bit more tightly than you had realized. The shoulders, seeing if you can let them drop down, relax a little bit. Just be. And as you gently allow the scan down through the arms, upper arms, elbows, lower arms, hands. Again, sensing these regions of the body that are so often engaged in our connections with others, our loving hands of support, perhaps on the back of a friend who might need it. Sometimes we might remember that these warm hands can be a support for ourselves when we're in moments of challenge. So if there's any way in which you've had a hard day, or if coming together and pausing, you're noticing some way in which you're fatigued, or some difficult emotion or thought is coming up for you, I'll invite you, if you're willing. I'm already rubbing my hands together, as I often do as part of this practice, feeling the energy and the warmth of that, but then placing one hand over the heart, or maybe both over the heart if you're willing. Be one hand over the heart, one hand over the belly button if you're willing. Just see what feels best for you, most comforting for you in this moment. Gently and intentionally inviting a sense of your own willingness to be there for yourself, to be made more manifest by just gently placing that supportive hand right over the chest, right beneath the belly button. So important, these regions, for the functioning of the brain and the rest of the body. So breathing in and breathing out, a little bit of gratitude. Now up, regaining the path of this body scan up now, again through the shoulders and now the neck region. This region of the throat, so important obviously for communication. Taking this moment, maybe for the first time today, to recognize the great gift, to the degree we can speak, or to the degree that this part of our body, whether we're able to speak or not, is a part of our experience of our being alive right now, helping process the foods we eat. In whatever way it might be possible for you, noticing and appreciating this region of the body, holding up the head, the face, allowing connection in a variety of ways with the outer experience of the world. So breathing in and breathing out, now going up through the musculature of the face. We're often holding the face much more tightly than we realize. So can we now notice these different beautiful muscles of the face that, again, are often operating throughout our day without our realizing it. Also, we might be holding tension down through the jawline, in the eye region. So if you're willing, softening the eyes, maybe even touching the face lovingly, gently. Sometimes the only time we hold our own head is when we're in a little bit of distress. Can we bring a little bit of loving support? So breathing in and breathing out. Now up through the crown of the head, going through the part of the brain, so busy doing so much. For those of us in academia, the prefrontal cortex, can we imagine bringing attention back to the crown of the head, the back of the head? It's like allowing a sense of a waterfall of attending down through this region at the back of the head, where so much of our brain's connections with feelings of distress and stress, fear, emotions. Let's allow ourselves to just come home to a holistic sense of these aspects of our body, constantly monitoring, processing the world, helping us stay regulated. So coming down now through the back again and through this sweep in whatever way is comfortable for you. Now just coming back home to the sense of the body as a whole. As we breathe in and out, feeling the spaciousness now of your body and being. Points of contact between the body and the chair, and beneath that the earth that we all share in this moment. and in every moment that we live and even beyond, this earth connects us. So feeling as best you can the support of being held by the earth in this moment, wherever you are, and also being held by the sensations of breathing, being connected together as we all are, by my voice, by our community of practice together. So extending the wish for well-being in a way that encompasses ourselves. We wish for our own healing, our own well-being as we breathe in, and as we breathe out, extending that wish to everyone here on this call, in this engagement, and to all those beyond whose lives are impacted by the work that we do, who may be suffering more so than we are right now. Breathing in, becoming aware of those on whose behalf we work, and breathing out, extending the wish for more healing, more peace, more resilience to all those who need it most in this moment. And as we bring this meditation to a close, I want to invite just sensing into what brings you into this conversation at this moment, this opportunity to reflect on the intersection between well-being, wellness, and practicing self-care, self-compassion. The relationship between these practices and the work that we do in the world. For justice, for racial justice, for equity. What is the relationship between self-care, interpersonal care, and healing the suffering in our communities and in the world beyond? Thank you. Thank you all for your practice. So I really want to invite bringing a thread, if you will, from this moment that we've taken together to restore right into these next moments as we will be engaged in a kind of interpersonal practice. I'll be sharing a few comments and reflections. I'll open up some slides, and then we'll move into a bit of Q&A interaction. But as best we can we imagine that there's really no difference, a seamlessness between this kind of personal practice that we just engaged in, the intentionality around reconnecting, restoring, honoring our being, this precious life that we know not, around which we all, none of us ever fully knows how long we have. So in this preciousness of recognizing that we're here, can we center on intentions for how we want to be here in ways that allow us to feel restored, in the way that we engage, by the questions that we bring, by the commitments that we carry. So sensing into, in whatever ways might be resonant with you, a thread of connection between the kinds of practices that we just explored together here and these big questions that we're going to turn toward. So what I'd like to do now is open up some slides. I'm going to share. So hopefully you can all see these slides, and I'm going to rely on my team here. If anybody has any problems with the technology, to let me know. So yes, as those of you who have been who've gathered here know, I am the author of this book called The Inner Work of Racial Justice. Subtitle is Healing Ourselves and Transforming Our Communities Through Mindfulness. The invitation to come and reflect together with this beautiful collaboration at the University of Washington has invited me to think about what I might share with you today that's alive in me around the themes of that work, the inner work of racial justice, which, by the way, of course, is really just an opportunity to kind of sort of marinate in, if you will, spend some time with this particular aspect of our experience. Not because it's the only aspect of our experience that matters. Not because it's the only aspect of social justice or social transformation that might be enlivening us right now, or that we might be drawn to work on right now. But simply because there may be some value in focusing our attention on this one aspect as a support for our journey as embodied human beings in a world where something called race is alive and real in a certain sense, maybe not real in some ultimate sense. We can talk about that. But it really is about recognizing that race actually does still matter, and that something called racism and racial injustice is a feature of our times. What that all may look like, how we may be thinking about that, what we may think about what to do about that. These are all very, very important questions. And to integrate our reflections about those aspects of our experience with consciousness and conscientiousness around self-care and interpersonal care is the animating theme of tonight's conversation. How do we strategically engage practices for resilience as a support for social transformation, as a support for addressing race and racism in a time of social challenge and change? Not easy. Not easy. The problem at the heart of, I have here kind of an acronym for the inner work of racial justice. Again, for me, there are many ways I could talk about that, but one way for now, I know that this is way too many words, but really it's first of all to recognize that the moment that we're in is 2021, it's December. We're coming together using these technological devices that didn't exist when I was born. I courageously name how long ago that was in a way that is radically countercultural for a woman to do still. 54 years ago, when I came onto the planet in 1967, we couldn't have done it this way. So many things we couldn't do this way, right? So our lives have taught us something about both change, possibility, what happens as a result of change. So, and that's been true over the arc of each of our lives. Invite that in. Name the year that you entered. Embrace that as part of your superpower, right? You're here. You've been here. We're here together now, okay? We've learned something along the way, a lot, many, many, many things. So part of this conversation is about recognizing contemplative approaches to teaching and learning, by which we deepen our understanding of the relevance of a kind of critical subjective reflection. When I say critical, what I mean is we're aware that our experience matters, but we're also aware of some of the ways that our perceptions are not necessarily either objective, or certainly they're not the whole story. So it's both recognizing the relevance and importance of our particular lived experience, but also holding it in with a kind of a question around, how might there be distortions in that? How might there be biases in that? How might I need to actually listen to your particular lived experience, as well as engage in, and those are all what we might call first person ways of knowing. In the contemplative pedagogy arena, we call it first person ways of knowing, subjective experience, critically thought about and engaged. How might we deepen our ways of knowing by critical first person, but also second person ways of knowing, how we learn from each other, and then third person ways of knowing, the things that we're known for in the academy at this time, the scientific method, the objective research and reporting, the scholarship. Contemplative pedagogy is about all those three different ways of knowing, and then opening the door to all kinds of different other ways we can think about how we know and what we know. But we definitely know something about the potential of this moment that we're in to connect. We're doing it right now with technology that didn't exist when I was born, didn't exist when many of us were born, and every year is changing, every day is changing, different capacities, right? So we've got a lot of possibility at this time. In my view, we've never lived at a time where there was greater potential for flourishing in connectivity than right now. And at the same time, it seems like, my goodness, at the very same time, and maybe by the very same mechanisms, we are experiencing perhaps a greater degree of destabilization, a sense of like lurking threat, and instability than perhaps at any other time, certainly I believe in my own lifetime, right? So we're at peak possibility and peak, let's just call it for now, freak out, all at the same time. And it's sort of all coming together. So pausing with the kind of serious lightness that seems called for when we're talking about such complex aspects of our reality, trying to put words around aspects of our reality that really are beyond words. Okay, so I'm just really touching on the fact that we're at a moment of potential, but we also know that in this very moment, and perhaps because of the same things that are giving rise to possibility, we're feeling increasing overwhelm, different kinds of threats to well-being, different kinds of threats to the ideal of democratic engagement and sharing power non-violently. Okay, so really at the heart of my work as a law professor, a mindfulness teacher and lifelong student, a sociologist before I was in law, I was in graduate school of sociology, really focused on how people resolve conflicts, non-legal forms of conflict resolution. And again, born as a Black, racialized, in the cisgender female body in the southern part of the United States, in a period of the kind of transformation brought by what's called the civil rights movement. I bring my own kind of subjective experience has kind of always kind of brought me up to this question. How do we minimize harm? How do we cultivate hope? How do we increase flourishing for all in the face of the challenges of social engagement? Those particular challenges look different at different times, look different through my experience than they do through yours. But for most of us, there's some degree of uncertainty, fear. We're aware of the different ways that people are being tempted to engage in violence. And we're aware that a kind of racism 2.0 or a new kind of appeals to white supremacy or white power. And I named that aspect because when we think about our history in the United States, it shouldn't surprise us that those deep trainings about who matters and who doesn't, about how power gets organized and the associations we make between race and human value that go very deep in our culture. We shouldn't be surprised that in this time of radical instability, new appeals to reorganizing ourselves around race and racial politics are part of what we're dealing with. How can we, in the face of all of that, dedicate ourselves to a way of being that minimizes harm? I want to name again a little bit of some of the ways that I see contemplative approaches to teaching and learning, which is what I mean by pedagogy. Right? So how are we orienting ourselves for the various dimensions of teaching and learning in a way that's supported by practices of mindfulness, compassion, contemplation? Well, there are many themes that we could highlight here, but I'm simply for now going to highlight a few. Ethics and care as a foundation for whatever I might do in teaching and learning from this moment forward. And so really, I think part of what I'm doing here is just naming that I believe that that we're called, as we do this work, to identify our values, to identify the principles that we seek to live and to make manifest through our scholarship, our teaching, our pedagogy, our advocacy, through our lives. Living on purpose is, I think, a basic invitation that what we call mindfulness is aiming toward, although it's not always the first thing we hear about mindfulness. But it is about recognizing that life is short and then deciding I want to choose how to live in the moments of this life. Perhaps with the support of practices that help me notice more of what there is to notice as I move through the work. Okay? So ethics and care and willingness to care for others as a ground for this. Taking some risks, because I think risk is always present, first and foremost, and so engaging it with some confidence and some strength and, understanding conscious engagement with risk as simply a part of what it means to be a powerful being in the world. So part of what we're talking about are ways to strengthen our power for this moment and also to strengthen the right uses of the power that we have. And so what's the role of practices of resilience, of self-care, of compassion in helping us strengthen our relationship with our own power and our commitment to the right use of our power? Okay? So that right there is could be its own, we could do its own long project around the right use of power at this time and the role of mindfulness and compassion practices in that. But whenever we talk about power, we're talking about a little bit of riskiness, because we're talking about how we relate to others. We are implicitly thinking about, well, what do we mean? Is this power over? Is there a notion of power with? I hope there is. I'm talking about power with you all, beautiful beings, not power over. But again, like all of these, there's so many different dynamics, dimensions of what we might mean when we talk about social justice that I want to just touch a little bit on here and invite this idea of exploring practices to support us in doing the work. And we've just explored one such practice, mindfulness meditation, with a focus on self-compassion, with a focus on other regarding compassion toward the end there when I was mentioning feel the strength within us, feel the ground beneath us, recognizes the ground that we all share, examine how it is that you are feeling some wellness and some willingness to alleviate your own suffering, but can we extend that to others everyone here, those whose lives are impacted by us. That's a kind of practice for cultivating self and other regarding compassion. It's a practice for cultivating a sense of our being always radically interconnected with a more than human world. As we breathe, we're reminded of this. The quality of the air that we breathe is its own kind of gift, but that we're responsible to each other for maintaining, are we not? As we engage and act in the world, we're impacting literally the quality of the air that we can breathe. As we engage and interact with each other, we're impacting each other in so many ways. And this, again, of course, is so relevant whenever we talk about race and racism. So this idea of understanding race and racism more effectively. Those are concepts that we can unpack more effectively, I think, with the support of practices that recognize we're not just talking about cognitive notions or ideas. We're not just talking about, this isn't just discourse we're doing. Our entire bodies are engaged in the teaching, learning, whatever we might do around minimizing the impact of racism. Our entire bodies are engaged in this idea, in the ideology around what race is and its meaning, because it's about ways that we are categorized, and we categorize other human beings, other embodied human beings. So reconnecting to the body. Again, a little bit countercultural in academic spaces, but I don't believe we can effectively address race, or frankly, any of the other ways that our human embodiments make us vulnerable to suffering in the world, whether it be about gender or sex orientation or class or any of that. We can't really effectively address these things, I don't think, if we can't create more integration between these aspects of ourselves that we think of as cognitive, intellectual, and the whole body. Bring it all in. So rehumanizing ourselves in that sense, you might say. But also, kind of minding the spaces between us where we can feel vulnerable together because of our different embodiments, and bringing together a certain kind of accountability around how we are together in these inherently interconnected spaces, in these inherently interactive spaces. We are always we're co-creating realities and experiences. Just to define ourselves around race or any other social category, but let's stick with race for now. To do that is to do that in relationship with some other so-called races and racialized bodies. So just to name a race is to implicitly invite some other race into the room, right? Because it's as against the others that these concepts take up any meaning. And context matters so much. Right? Because how we define ourselves racially, how people define us, the meanings, the threats associated with it, the politicking around it, all of that is done in particular social locations. It varies wherever we are. It varies over time. It matters who's in the room, who isn't. So this kind of radical complexity is not easy to really, navigate in a world of sound bites and bumper stickers. But it's this space for dealing with these complex dynamics in our world with more of that resilience, that more stamina, with more capacity, if you will. That's what I think this work that we're talking about, the inner work of racial justice, can invite for us, so that we can deepen our capacity to flourish together. So take a moment, reflect on our shared core values. I say shared in brackets because our values are going to be different, right? Even if we say, well, we all value equity, fairness, inclusivity, let's just say, if we sat together at a table and had a conversation, what do we mean by those things? we're going to see those meanings probably differently. What do we mean when we say social justice? What does transformative teaching look like? Again, so the fact that there are going to be differences should not mean that we shy away from difficult conversations about them. You know, if we can have more ability to stay present with each other despite our differences, to learn from each other, to kind of keep stitching together these worlds that have been torn asunder. I mean, to me, this is what the invitation of living in diversity is. It's about deepening that ability to do that, and then to do it again when we find ourselves at the breach of some conflict that might send us off in different camps. How do we keep coming back together? That's what resilient community, I think, might look like. So it's about navigating some waters. And by the way, I'm just going to name these concepts from a teaching story from the Buddha being just one of many sort of teachers underlying some of what we call mindfulness and compassion. Not the only one. And forgive me if for some it's a little strange to hear a reference to the Buddha, but a teacher whose life actually is part of, I think, a lot of the deep underlying wisdom that we're trying to bring. Just one, though. There's so many different teachers that we want to invite into this conversation. Who are those teachers for you? But this idea of not straining and not stopping. Don't go beyond what we can do. Isn't that about well-being? Personally, don't go beyond what you can do. Notice the call, the temptation to try to take on more than you can. But also don't completely stop either. Don't give up. Know that you can rest and take a break and re-engage. Okay? So really, this is an inquiry. What does straining look like for you? On the other hand, what does stopping look like for you? And looking at these things from the inner and the outer dimension. So you'll see that questions are really at the heart of this work for me. Less about here's a 5-point plan, a strategy, a checklist, even though, and again, countercultural. Can we sit with the questions? The questions are important enough, are really, really important, to have us open up our personal, interpersonal, and systemic institutional domains of experience together, to have us explore together what does racial justice mean to us. It might be, I use this idea of love, power, in action, but what does it look like for you? Okay? What is race? Again, we've already been talking a little bit about this. It's an idea, we say it's a social construct, but what does that really mean in terms of what does it feel like in our bodies to encounter race? What happens when we're invited into a conversation about race? Where do we start to feel a little bit of tightness, pulling away, a sense that I need to put up a mask and defend, a sense that I'm going to talk about this for a little while and then I'm going to run out of that conversation and hopefully won't have to talk about race for a while again. What's the emotional landscape underneath it? Where's the wounded heart? Because believe me, if we're not creating space for at least examining and exploring that within ourselves, it's not that it's not there. The wounded heart around race is real in our culture. The fear, the sense that I will be wounded, or I'm going to be asked to atone for something my community did. The feeling of not being good enough or being accepted as who we are. This emotional landscape underlying these conversations must somehow be addressed, because it's the failure, I think, to really find ways of addressing it that sets us up for so much failure in terms of impact. So how might we better understand and more effectively address race, racism, racial justice, these isms, by examining and working with thoughts, feelings, sensations that come up in the body when we reflect and engage on these things? How can we create spaces where that's okay? And not just once, but for the rest of our lives. Because we're going to need this kind of support for as long as we're human. Okay? So, of course, we can talk more about, and we don't have time here. I want to pause. But really, mindfulness is has been what I've been speaking to as we've talked about these practices: openness, awareness, friendly openness to what is, but also loving care, right? Being with reality from that place. You all know that my book lays out these sort of 5 different dimensions of this inner work and describes mindfulness much more fully. I give also present practices like this RAIN practice, acronym RAIN: recognize, accept, investigate with non-identification or non-attachment or nurturing. When we're having a moment around race, when there's a microaggression, when there's a kind of a wanting to pull back because the theme of race has come up and all of a sudden we're getting quiet, or feeling like we gotta jump in, just noticing more. And so deepening our awareness in support of these different forms of resilience. That's what this is about. So yes, can we deepen our awareness, our capacities, motivated by the sense of justice as what love looks like in public? I'm here with you for this and more. You can always follow me and stay in contact with me at my website, but I want to stop this share, see if there are questions that have come up. I know I've spoken longer than I thought I would. This always happens. Are there questions? Reflections? And I have a little bit more time. I know there may be some people who may have to pop off now. And I'm seeing beautiful faces that have stayed with me longer than they thought they would, I think. But if you have to pop off, totally understand. Let's see if we can. I can certainly go for a little while longer. It's totally up to you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Rhonda. I think that we would love to ask you some questions. I know that Megan and I are eager to be the first ones asking you some questions. And I mean, you gave us so much to think with and to really just kind of sit with and to hold there. What we wanted to do was to begin with some of the questions that we're actually asking our participants in our resistance through resilience practice in our dialogues. And so the first one is asking you personally, when you are confronted with microaggressions, when you are confronted with everyday racism, with everyday sexism, with everyday forms of identity-based oppression, when do you decide to speak back, and when do you decide to remain silent?
Oh, thank you. So I guess I want to say that I love this question. It's very lively, right? It varies. There's no one answer to that at all. I think for me, I always want to ground in my values and in my, my deep intentions, which, sometimes call me to create more space for what is arising before I break in with my analysis. I'm a lawyer and a sociologist and a critical race theorist. Like, I can just jump in with analysis. But again, everything I just described, I think, right, is partly a kind of a little bit of a field guide for reckoning with what happens on the way to analyzing somebody within myself and between us, and what can happen as I do that. So you all know that I've written in the book about some of those moments where I've been in a classroom and someone's called out something, said something that's caught me up. So it all varies quite a lot. And this is why, for me, it really comes down to a daily practice of being in touch with the fact that my life is short. How I interact with people matters. And I often am reminded of one of my teachers, a gentleman by the name of John Paul Lederach, who's like this, peacemaker emeritus. He spent his 40, 50 years out there rushing to, Bosnia and Rwanda and places where we needed to resolve conflict. And his message to me and a bunch of others right after the election of 2016 was there are going to be moments where we're going to just want to respond right away. And we will do that sometimes. But ideally, we're realizing that we're all suffering and we're all in need of deeper repair and maybe, less wounding again. So ideally, if we can find within us the resources to stay in difficult conversations with people for the rest of our lives, and through those relationships, we'll discern the moments where we need to say what we need to say, where we need to pull back and really listen. And again, this is very countercultural, right? Because here we are, we want to learn when we say what. It's like, well, let the relationship move at the speed of trust and relationship, if we can. That is what I think we're being called to try to make real in our lives. I hope that helps.
That it really does tremendously, and that really takes me to how that is a practice, right? To move at someone else's speed, and to really intentionally take on a pause when you get hot immediately.
Yes, it is a practice, and so we have to ask ourselves: are we willing to how much of this are we willing to do? And I really mean that. Part of what this conversation, what your work can do, is to really invite people into kind of intentional reflection on how they want to be in the work of racial justice or broader forms of social justice. And again, it is practice, it is lifelong, it is ethics-based, it is a way of saying, hey, I get to choose how I want to be in this life. And I'm going to make real the power that I have to live in a way that makes, that brings the justice that I seek right here. That we're not waiting for somebody else to kind of make the world just before we show up in the way that we might imagine we would if justice were here. It's like, what if we start showing up in that way as part of how justice might be midwifed? Yes. Maybe that's part of what we need to do.
Thank you. I'm going to hand the mic over to Megan for the next question.
Rhonda, thank you. Thank you for leading the practice of restoration, and then for inviting us to stay with ourselves as we moved into the conceptual. I have a question. We've been exploring these themes of resistance and resilience. So this question is around this idea of resistance and resilience. Does mindfulness or compassion play a role in your resistance? What spaces nurture your resistance?
Oh, yeah. I mean, mindfulness, compassion. So again, resistance has looked like a lot of things in these many years that I've been at it, becoming a lawyer, when people like me were not expected to become lawyers, and then a law professor, right? Writing and speaking about race when I was literally told by folks at various points in my academic career, don't write about race, everyone already knows you're Black, things like that. I mean, so resistance can look like a lot of things, I have learned. So, and mindfulness and compassion are all, for me, again, the foundation of my very life. So, unpacking. I think when we think of resistance, we often think of it as like confrontation, maybe. But I'm remembering, I am the child of, granddaughter of, great-granddaughter of, and so I'm thinking about the generations of women who went before, whose strategies of resistance enabled us to be here. And those strategies were manifold. There were many different ways they resisted, and they had to become expert in discerning when and how to do what. So I guess that's just my way of saying that, sometimes it's speaking up, sometimes it's letting my action speak by leaving or putting up a wall and saying no more to this, like creating a space that is, infused with certain commitments that we hold ourselves accountable for, and we check, and when they're not being met, we with as much kindness and love as possible, call ourselves to accountability and move on and separate if we need to. In other words, it's really about recognizing that my life actually already does matter and I actually already do belong. And so how then do I want to meet each moment where there might be some pushback to that? And depending on what that pushback looks like, how do I want to meet that in a way that keeps me in touch with my own sense of my own dignity and the right use of this power that I have?
I hear you talking just about that, that way of staying, as you invited us in that beginning practice, of staying connected to ourselves and staying connected to what's coming up for us, what's coming up in our bodies, our feelings, our thoughts, our sensations, staying connected to the other person, remembering the earth connects us all those themes around interconnectedness you talked about, and making decisions in those moments of like, what do I need right now for myself? What do I need right now in this moment with this person?
Exactly.
Yeah, really beautiful. Thank you, Rhonda.
You're welcome.
Rhonda, we wanted to just move to a couple of the questions from the audience, please. Bettina asks something that probably will sound familiar, certainly is familiar to me. When you are the only person of color in the room, how do you hold what she named as this beautiful standpoint when you feel alone?
Yeah. So I have to tell you right now, I'm having a little bit of reactivity when I hear of the image of the only person of color in the room. Even though, again, I know what that's like, and I know that it may be unavoidable sometimes because of the way the world is. I have to say, of course, though, that, when I find myself in a situation where I'm the only person of color in the room, I'm noticing that, and I'm aware that I might not come back to that space if I have a choice. I mean, I guess what I'm saying is, I know that sometimes we don't have a choice. We're in a class, we're in a session, and we are the only person of color. But the fact that there's so many of those situations that still persist, given the demographics of the United States and frankly the world, we need somehow to kind of park that, set another session for like really looking at how systems perpetuate pain and harm. Because it really shouldn't be, we shouldn't have very many of those such spaces anymore. And yet, of course, we do. So this is why why these are practices that we engage in. I engage in my practice on this cushion that I have one. I always have one in practically every room nowadays. But I engage in my practices of sitting meditation, walking, cultivation of compassion, journaling, movement practices, singing, humming, all the things that I do for those moments when I don't have any external mirroring of you matter, and I'm needing to call that up from in here. I can do that because I've spent time grounding and remembering, and I've cultivated spaces where that mirroring is happening. So I often think about the practices literally being for those moments where we are the only, whether it's in a workplace or, out on a hike, wherever we might be, and suddenly we find ourselves being the only. It is about we do this work so that when we are there, we don't feel alone. And we can bring who we are. And if we are not safe, we know that we need to just not be there. If it's not safe for us to come at it from this place of full recognition of our worth, but also recognition of the justness of calling us into some accountability around whatever it is we're doing. If we can't feel met in that, then, again, we have some responsibility to pause, to ask ourselves, how can we help create better spaces than this one in a more systematic way, so that we're not just finding ourselves there and having to do repair work.
I so appreciate that answer. And what I really appreciate, especially there, is the thought that sometimes I think that the impetus is when we are the only, or we are the first, that we carry everybody with us, right? And what you're saying is we don't have to do that, right? We can lay that burden down and come in, enter in as individuals, work hard to change the room, to constantly do that, but also not to constantly have to feel that weight that we know impacts us tremendously.
Yeah. I mean, we weren't born to suffer. Those of us who suffer, especially around these issues of identity, we were not born to this. I remember Alice Walker, with whom I and some others were privileged to sit a couple years ago, teachers of color, and her insight, the teaching that she offered to us is, we're meant to see that color purple. Like, don't miss the joy of being alive. Don't miss your unique original medicine, right? Don't carry always that burden. Be, live, thrive. Know that that's what you're, to me, I think of it, I sometimes use this phrase, it's like the first approximation of justice. It has to start right here. And this isn't about being selfish, but it is about recognizing that if we are not able to kind of, feel our way into the rightness of our own need for healing and support, we're always going to be hungrier in the work that we do. So I'm trying to do this work from a place of some fullness. And that means caring for myself as justice, and doing what I need to take care of myself, and, keeping that strand of the justice work as I work with others. And so that means that I'm going to keep doing things. I'm not waiting till I'm fully healed, because life, we never know when, right? We just keep doing what we can with hope and with humility. But we must, I think, not forget, we're not meant to suffer. We're not meant to constantly feel bereft. We're meant to feel the joy of being alive. So let's feel that, even as we, are sometimes needing to stop the script and say, we need to address this particular issue. Or even as sometimes we do need to say, I am speaking on behalf of the people who are not here. But don't let any of that work that we are choosing to do as we're using our power get in the way of taking care. We need to take care. If we need to pull back, we need to pull back. If we need a sister or a brother or a colleague, right, them, we need folks on our side. Let's call for them. Let's link arms with them. Do what we need to do to maintain ourselves as we do this work. I see there's also this question about, I know we got to go soon too, but how do I learn to find my voice when I've been told I'm not enough? I hope I've alluded a little bit to that. This is why we do the work starting with ourselves, and give ourselves the time that we need. And first listen to ourselves. How can we expect other people to listen to us if we're not really listening to ourselves?
Thank you, Rhonda. I feel like we could just continue this conversation and continue. And then you had to open up the piece around systems. I'm ready when you are for to be able to start that conversation with you too. We know that the practices that you describe in your book so eloquently help us prepare for those moments that you're describing, whether in allyship or in moments of resistance, whatever it may be. Those practices help us be prepared for the decisions that we need to make when we're encountering those types of stressors and et cetera. And so We also know, though, that we need to be looking at these larger systems in the ways in which we can. So thank you for bringing that question tonight into the space. I look forward to engaging that further across our campus and beyond. And I look forward to staying in this conversation with you too. We're so grateful that you were able to accept our invitation to come join our community and bring your wisdom and bring your heart and bring that restoration to us. We really want to encourage folks who attended tonight, and there were many. There were many people listening, and adding to that live stream, we want to encourage them to buy your book at an independent bookstore so that they can kind of dive deeper into everything that you outline in there, your wisdom. So folks, check out the inner work and be in conversation with the Center for Communication, Difference, and Equity, be in conversation with us at the Resilience Lab, be in conversation with our other partners across campus who are also deeply embedded in this work, the other faculty, the staff, the students who are also engaging in leading these efforts. We're excited to bring a couple more lectures to you this year. In winter and spring quarters, we'll be inviting other thought leaders like Rhonda Magee to campus to continue this conversation. We'll be in touch with those details. And appreciation again to the folks who supported us tonight on the back end for Dancing in the Rain Media. You're wonderful. We appreciate you. And a deep appreciation for everyone who participated tonight by showing up on Tuesday evening, 6 to 7:15 to be with us. Thank you.
Thank you. And until the next time, right? The work continues. The one great work that we're doing in whatever way that make the world just a little bit better. I really respect and honor all that you all are doing at the University of Washington. And thank you for allowing me to be a part of your community of practice and learning tonight. Until the next time, may you be well, may you be safe, may you stay connected in, may you be in your own joy and power.